the problem with Gambia is, and I believe this is the case for a lot of our countries across the continent, is that there's a lot of discrimination. And the way we are brought up as young people, we're taught certain values that, or you can't have a voice in spaces where older people hold positions. You can't say certain things. So an empowered Gen Z would be someone that is unapologetically outspoken, that has a stance, that can speak about issues that they're passionate about, that can speak about issues that affect them, affect their communities, affect people in those communities and their lives and their livelihood.
This season of the Unamplified podcast is sponsored by the GIZ African Union Aware Project. A project aims to strengthen women's representation and participation in political processes.
Hello, Africa. Welcome to another episode of the Unamplified podcast. My name is Cynthia Mbamalu, your host, and with me today is my co-host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unamplified podcast. My name is Queen CY. Always coming with the vibes.
Yeah, and you're looking so beautiful today.
Thank you.
Like you came with sunshine, with light, with everything positive.
And the vibe.
Oh, yes, and the vibes always. That's Queen CY for you. So today, we're talking about getting the numbers, opening up the space, getting the numbers. And we come from a rich continent, They say Africa is a rich continent. We think about human resources, we think about the wealth of natural resources that we have across board. But the bigger question is, for a country so rich with all of these resources, do we enjoy the benefits of having this many resources in our continent? Can we say that the average African is happy with the state of affairs in their respective countries? And so we'll be talking about how do we get quality representation into the political space? How do we get quality leadership into the leadership space? And then how do we get younger people, especially young women, as part of the leadership conversation in our country? And to have this conversation today, we have two powerful women, one from the Gambia and one from Nigeria. Queen CY, over to you.
Yes, we have Marcelina Okalo. She is a Nigerian professional and she is the program officer of Fix Politics, a citizen-led movement dedicated to structurally transforming politics in Africa. And also from Gambia, we have Lala Toure. She is a Gambian prominent author, activist, and she wears so many hats. Welcome to the Unamplified podcast, Lala.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and Marcelina, it's good to have you. Thank both of you. I see you're my sisters on the continent, and I'm glad we're having this conversation today. I guess a place to start from is you talk about how we're blessed as a continent. Every country in Africa is blessed with one natural resource or the other. However, we're still struggling with development. We're struggling with high rates of poverty, youth unemployment. And in all of this, the question is, what's the quality of leadership? What's the level of youth involvement, women involvement in politics? And can we say we have a politics that works for us? And so this is my first question, and maybe I'll begin with Lala. Is politics what it ought to be in the Gambia? And depending on what your response is, why?
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for that question. I think just to piggyback on, what you were talking about earlier about the resources that we have on the African continent and the quality of politics that we have. I think that one of the biggest resources that we have on the continent, which is largely not used, is the youth population across the continent. Young people from diverse backgrounds, young people with many talents, young people with skills and capacity to actually lead, to bring about change, particularly young women on the continent who are not being given the opportunity to lead, who are not being given the platforms to add their voice to decision making, add their voice to policy making. And whether or not politics is what it's ought to be in the Gambia, I think that even though we've made significant progress over the past couple of years, there's still a lot more that has to be done. there's still a lot that needs to be done from all different sectors, right? From the government, from civil society, from political parties, to ensure that the relevant spaces, the right avenues are created through which young women, through which young people can not just add their voice, but also like influence change through policies, through decision making. And what we've seen in the Gambia is young people have been in the forefront from the very start, from many years ago. Young people have been in the forefront asking for change. In 2016, when Gambians wanted change of an undemocratic government, it was young people that went out in the streets to protest. It was young people that went out in the streets to demand for a democratic change of government. So we've seen young people add their voice. But when it comes to representation, when it comes to political participation, or when it even comes to inclusion in governance, we've seen the very low numbers of young people, of young women in parliament, in local government, even within political party structures. The avenues or the opportunities are barely created for them in most of the parties that we have in the Gambia to actually take charge, to take a stance, to lead, to bring about change. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. There's so many challenges, but there've also been some milestones, some achievements that have been registered along the way. So we are at a point where we need to really consolidate on those gains, but also take collective action to continue promoting the increased inclusion of young people, young women, particularly in these spaces and in these conversations.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll come to you, Marcelina. Is politics what it ought to be? And maybe to add to that, can we say we young women are participating? Are young women voting? Are young women in Nigeria interested in politics?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I would start by saying that yes, the politics itself, I'm not, well, it's a direct no.
Is it there?
It's not what it ought to be actually in Nigeria. Politics trumps everything from education to welfare, health, to transportation, to economy, to our everyday living. And it has if it's not being done right, it definitely has effect on everything that we do. And so it is important that politics needs to be paid attention to.
Yeah.
So, but for women participation, I don't think it is what it ought to be as well. Women are not necessarily given that chance. Look at what's happening currently in the National Assembly.
Yeah.
We just have 4 women and 1 is already out.
Yeah, in the Senate, yeah.
And almost been, in fact, thrown out of the Senate, and not just thrown out, still being tortured too. It's a big problem in Nigeria, and I think that it should be given attention to. It's a systematic problem, and I know that systematic problems should be faced with strategic responses. So yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, do you think young women are voting in Nigeria?
I think young women are voting. I went to vote during the last elections, and I had a lot of women who were there. We were excited. From my compound, we were super excited. And I know that young women vote from my own perspective and from the people that I saw with the interest. We saw how the last election went and how Nigeria has a very beautiful population of youths. About 60% of youths, and most youths are under about 30 years of age, about 60% in Nigeria, but they're not being harnessed and being taken advantage of. So, and a majority of that number are women inclusive. So I know that women are actually voting. Yes.
Yeah. Mensiwa, he has some thoughts too.
Yes. So me, I think politics is not what it is in Nigeria, particularly not in the sense of competence, inclusive systems, and maybe fair elections, but rather through godfatherism, where political loyalty is being celebrated more than competence. True. And also violence. You can see that sometimes during election, not even sometimes, oftentimes, always during election, we can see violence that come up, and so many people are being scared to come out to vote.
Absolutely.
And also we can see that political parties in their own parts are not even helping matters in putting structures in place to help people to come out, especially women, to come out for election, which makes me to want to ask this question for Lala. You've used art, particularly in advocating for inclusion. Do you think that creative expressions can be used as a tool for political inclusion across Africa?
Yes, totally. I think that art is one of the most creative ways through which we can raise awareness, we can enlighten people, we can engage in dialogue. We've seen across the continent how the term activism has been used, which is art and activism combined. And in my personal experience, I have been able to use my art. I've been able to use poetry over the past couple of years to talk about issues that are of interest, social issues, political issues that are of interest to my people in my country, but also that are of interest to people across the continent, right? So it gives us an opportunity to raise awareness, to talk to people about issues that are fundamental to the consolidation of democracy in our different countries on the continent. But also, we have seen how there's a growing interest from the younger generations, Gen Zs, in political conversations, in social conversations. These are people that are very engaged in music, that are very engaged in poetry, that are very engaged in, painting. And these are ways through which they express their feelings. These are ways that they express their emotions. These are ways that they communicate what their thoughts, what their perspectives, what their opinions are on democracy, on governance, on politics. So it has been a very it has been a great avenue for myself, but also for other young people across the Gambia. We've seen a growing number of young people in the Gambia becoming poets. We've seen a growing number of Gambians becoming musicians, and they've used this as a tool to talk to the people, to raise awareness. When we do activism in civil society, we go to the grassroots and we do grassroots engagements. For a lot of these artists or a lot of these creative creative people that are engaged in using creative arts, they use their music, they use their poetry, they use their painting to actually put out a message across to the people, and it has been very effective, a very effective way of reaching out to people and reaching out to communities where you don't have the opportunities to go to.
Yeah, and thank you. When you talked about leveraging arts, creative art, and I know if there's one thing we're blessed with in Africa is creativity. Yeah, you can't talk about Africa without our reading, without our poetry, without our stories, and without our entertainment, because these are the beautiful things that make us who we are. But the beautiful things are also tell our stories to the world. And I love the idea you talked about bringing it into politics, because I think a lot of times there's a conversation around young people caring a lot about entertainment, sports, and less about politics. But we're seeing a shift in that. We're seeing younger people asking questions. We're seeing young women who are leading protests. I know in Kenya there's been a protest against femicide. There's been a trend of women being killed, and you've had young women leading protests around that. I know if you think about the protests in Nigeria, you can't talk about EndSARS without thinking about the young women that led and provided leadership within that movement. Same also different parts of the continent. And this brings me to the question I wanted to ask ask you, Marcelina. We're heading to the elections. 2027 is almost here. We'll be going to the polls again. There will be elections for the office of the president, the Senate, the House of Representatives, state assemblies, and the governor. Right? As we plan ahead, what can we do, or what opportunities exist for us to one, start identifying young women that can contest for elections, and what kind of support do we need to increase women participation ahead of the next election?
I know there are several options, several things to do. I particularly would talk about fixed politics, SPPG. SPPG is School of Politics, Policy and Governance.
Yeah.
And that's an arm of fixed politics where young people are being trained.
Yeah.
Like, it's building a massive political class, people that would run for election.
Yeah.
And as at last year, graduated about 244 people.
244 young people.
Yes,
Mm.
very young people. And half of that number are women.
Wow, half
Yes.
of that number.
Yes, there were a lot of women in class.
Mm.
And I think that that's a very good way to encourage young people, because that class was very intensive, and it gave young people the opportunity to say, oh, so we can be included in this space. We can be groomed to be a part of this. And then there's an alumni arm of it where there is a huge support and encouragement for people to run for office. Don't just go through the school, run for office. So, and there's a support alongside that as well. So I think that is a very, it's one of the strategy that can be, that has been implemented. And if other organizations can look at that and also take a leaf from that. I also think that dialogues will go a long way.
Dialogues. Okay.
Yes, if dialogues and such podcasts such as this that is being done to create more awareness, to even going to the field to fish out their young talent. There are people who are eager. They just need that support system. And when organizations can take up that opportunity to pick these women, we would have good numbers out there.
Yeah, I've taken the opportunity to pick the women, and then I'll come to the Gambia, because your election most likely will be before ours, before Nigeria's elections. I followed the Gambia elections from the point of, when the whole movement of Gambia has decided started, and then till the current president, his first term, and then now. Increasingly, it seems like the kind of enthusiasm I felt then amongst young Gambians is no longer, how do I put it? That level of enthusiasm, I'm not feeling it as it were, as it used to be before. And I'm wondering what happened in these few years, that may have contributed to that. And that's one. The second is ahead of the elections. What are the opportunities? How can we start positioning women, especially young women? How can we begin to position them as quality candidates or quality aspirants to contest at primary level and emerge as candidates and subsequently win? What do we need to do now ahead of that election?
Yeah, I think that, like you rightly mentioned, there was a lot of enthusiasm, there was a lot of hope, a lot of commitment from young people in the Gambia over the past couple of years. And we've seen some changes in that trend recently. And I think it has a lot to do with some commitments that were made to ensure democratic reforms in the Gambia, and how there've been numerous challenges to realize those commitments. And we've seen, the efforts to ensure the Gambia has constitutional reform has failed back in 2020 when the draft constitution was rejected in Parliament. We've seen how, even efforts to ensure the security sector reforms are still very limited. So there's been a lot of happenings that is like limited, or that has changed the perspectives, or that has changed the stance of Gambian young people from being very hopeful, taking very strong stances for democratic change, to becoming more relaxed now because of some of these things that have happened in the Gambia. And when it comes to what we can do to position women ahead of the upcoming elections, I think one of the mistakes or one of the challenges with supporting women in politics is that we we wait for election cycles to come, and then we have mentorship programs and we have capacity building programs. And this is a gap that exists within the international development sector, where programs are approved like a year before, 6 months before elections, and that's when all the support is pumped into communities to support women. In patriarchal societies like the Gambia, where people are likely to not vote for women, it's very important that young women candidates are supported in a long term, like they're supported to connect with voters, they're supported to connect with their communities, they're supported to develop campaign strategies 3 years before the elections, 2 years before the elections. And this helps them, gain some support at a grassroots level, because it's very difficult. In the Gambia, women make up, based on our last electoral data in 2021, when we started the election cycle, 56.7% of voters were women, of registered voters were women. women participate, women are in the forefront, particularly young women. But when it comes to representation, those numbers go significantly down, right? So there's a need for continued mentorship and capacity strengthening for women, especially those that have interest to contest for elections within political parties, but even women that intend to run as independent candidates. So continued capacity strengthening throughout the years ahead of the electoral cycle. So when elections come, they're already in a very strong position to contest. And the other thing is making sure we strengthen internal political party democracy. So we're able to integrate gender, we're able to mainstream women in political party processes. Because what we have in the Gambia is a lot of these political parties do not even have gender policies, right? They don't have internal mechanisms to strengthen the inclusion of women. So you see a political party with most of the executives being men, and the positions that are given to women are women mobilizers, women campaigners. And what this does is, when it comes to selection for candidates during elections, a lot of women are encouraged to allow their male opponents to run for the party ticket instead of like running for that party's ticket. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done within political party structures themselves so that they're more inclusive, but also so that they recruiting young women and they investing in their capacities, but they also building internal mechanisms or strengthening internal mechanisms to ensure that they're putting women forward as candidates, but they're also supporting them. Another problem in the Gambia is a lot of women are not confident enough to run for elections because they've seen the violence, even though in the Gambia it's not physical violence, but there's a lot of cyberbullying, there's a lot of online violence. So political parties also need to make sure they're taking a stance to protect these young women that they're putting forward as candidates when they go through social stigma, when they go through discrimination and violence simply because they're women who dare to contest for an elections.
Yeah, I think if I come to Queen Tiwa, I want to get your thoughts on this because we're talking about how do we get a lot of women, and perhaps let's have a little visioning session with you. What would a politically empowered Gen Z look like in the Gambia, especially Gen Z women? What would it look like in the Gambia?
Empowered Gen Z in the Gambia would be someone that has a voice, right? A strong voice, someone that is not afraid to speak up because of what the reaction of the public is going to be. Someone that's not afraid to speak up because of stigma. The problem with Gambia is, and I believe this is the case for a lot of our countries across the continent, is that there's a lot of discrimination. And the way we are brought up as young people, we're taught certain values that, or you can't have a voice in spaces where older people hold positions. You can't say certain things. So an empowered Gen Z would be someone that is unapologetically outspoken, that has a stance, that can speak about issues that they're passionate about, that can speak about issues that affect them, affect their communities, affect people in those communities and their lives and their livelihood without worrying about what the consequences going to be. Am I going to be arrested? Am I going to face backlash? Am I going to be discriminated against? So we have young people within political parties, Gen Zs within political parties, who are even afraid to speak up for accountability within those same parties because of what the reactions would be.
Yeah, you heard what
I heard it. Yeah. So, but I want to ask Marcelina, as we talk about getting the numbers, what role do mentorship and intergenerational alliances play in supporting women?
I think that there's not so much of that, but it can be implemented, it can be increased, it can be improved upon. For example, people that have, like older women that have gone ahead, people like Dr. Obi, this is where she has decided to take advantage of the School of Politics, Policy and Governance to equip the younger generation on political issues and political and economical issues. And I think that if more women who have achieved, who had gone through that, can do the same, we will have more numbers. I think it's very, very valuable that this is implemented and this happens.
When you were talking, I remembered what Lala talked about, what a politically empowered Gen Z would look like. Someone who is outspoken, unapologetically present and visible, engaging, even within political parties. And then just connecting it to the intergenerational conversation around mentorship. And I'll throw this open to everyone. Do we think that there's an opportunity for learning across generations? I maybe I'll begin with Lala. Do you think it's an opportunity for learning um across generations? So be it the older women who have fought the fight, they've been there, like he made reference of Dr. Obi Ozekwesili, or the ones be after her generation, like the millennials, for instance, and then the Gen Z. Do you think there is that conscious deliberate conversation across generations to ensure this experience share in a way that builds the kind of supports we need? Lala, maybe we'll begin with you.
I do think that the opportunities are there for that to happen, to have intergenerational dialogue, intergenerational collaboration, mentorship. But I do think that, especially with like us Gen Zs, like there's a gap that exists, right, between us and the older generation. So, for example, in the Gambia, I recently facilitated intergenerational dialogues between older people, older politicians, more seasoned and experienced politicians, and Gen Zs, a younger generation of politicians. And one of the key things that came up was, even though there's like a huge need for experience sharing and learning and intergenerational collaboration, there are huge gaps, misconceptions that happen with the older generation thinking that Gen Zs, these are like loud, overly confident young people, also thinking that these older people, they're just there to keep these positions. They don't want to open up the opportunities for us to lead, right? So I feel like if we're going to get to a stage where we'll have these mentorship programs, we will have these intergenerational conversations between older and younger generations. We need to be able to bridge those gaps and have honest conversations around some of these misconceptions that both generations have of each other.
Yeah, Quincy, why?
Well, just from what she said, the older generation, they always see the Gen Zs as not having respect, because Gen Z because the Gen Z just throws it as it is. They don't have filter. They throw it as it is. So just from what she said, that they need to have this honest conversation and they need to have mentorship programs to make the Gen Z understand from the point of view of where the other generations are coming from and all that.
Yeah, do you want to add to?
I think that if this opportunity is given, there will be kind of freshness in this space. Fresh perspective.
You say freshness, meaning you think that the space now is not
It
fresh.
is. It has been outdated.
It's
outdated. The outdated systems.
Oh, really?
I think so. So if this opportunity is given, and there will be better freshness or fresh perspective in this space.
Fresh perspective. I agree. Fresh perspective. Yes, because the truth is, like we always say, you can't keep doing the same thing, same way,
expect
she
even said the whole godfatherism. So people are in that office and they're under pressure to please certain people. But if we can eradicate that form of leadership and bring people who are ready to do the work, who have character, who have competence, who have capacity to do the work, I think that it will be a great shift. But then the systematic issue is a big challenge, especially for Nigeria. There's a very, very less value of women in Nigeria. And I'm not sure I know all the solutions that should be implemented for that to be taken away. Because even the men you work with in the office, you can still see that atom of the way you're being treated. There's still that difference.
Yeah.
Yes, they can openly say that, oh, we support women. But when it comes to when you go deeper, you see that even them, they get to a point that they feel like you're crossing the line. So that thing comes out, and it's a system thing. It's something that's eating deep into the fabrics of every one of us in Nigeria. How we have been brought up from families.
Yeah.
How women have been trained to be quiet, while the men are the ones that should speak. I've been to meetings where a woman is trying to say something and he says, "Shut up, you're a woman." And he was said in Igbo,
Wow.
Yes, and these are the issues when it comes to Nigerian politics. And that's why Natasha could even face what she's facing at that level. So it's a very fundamental issue that should be tackled.
Yeah, I know when she said this whole, when you're in a meeting and a woman is talking and then you hear someone say, "Shut up, you're a woman," or "Shut up, don't speak," or "Shut up, men are speaking, you shouldn't speak." We still see this happening. And I've always wondered, if this is limited to a generation. For instance, and maybe Lala, are Gen Z men, are they more Gen Z men in the Gambia? Because Nigeria, we have some similarities in our context, but there are still some peculiarities, right? Are Gen Z men in the Gambia more receptive, open to having conversations with women as equal partners? And are they more receptive to issues advancing and women's rights and women's political leadership?
I think that there's a lot of learned behavior by Gen Z men from the older generations. And you see this manifest in how they interact with women, how they talk about women, how they address women even. I mean, we've had cases in the Gambia where, for example, when we were having the conversation or when we were advocating to maintain the FGM ban in the Gambia, which they wanted to uplift back in 2024, we saw like very disturbing comments, very disturbing things that were being said by young men, Gen Z men, right? So it's across generations, the toxicity, the patriarchal beliefs, the wanting to have control and dominance over women, it's across generations. And we've seen, even though they're like men, Gen Z men, and men who work within our spaces to amplify our voices, to work with us, to provide support, to be our allies. And we still see like many other young men who actually very toxic and go by the values and the principles and teachings of patriarchy. And back to what you were saying, I mean, a lot of us young women who've walked in this space, we've had experiences where you sit around and you sit on a table with like men who, with whom you have equal, not like you have the same knowledge they have. You even probably even have more experience and knowledge than they have on certain issues. And when you speak, your opinion is not given as much relevance or as much importance as that of a man's, even if it's the same opinion that they're given, right? So if I had to say something and I said it, people were okay, that's fine. But if a man said the same opinion, shared the same opinion after me, then oh, that's such a great idea. Or we think these are ways that we can explore this, you know. So all of those subtle things that are done on the side by men, to basically diminish women in very subtle ways.
Wow, you know when you talked about how you could say the same thing, exactly the same thing, and what a young man said or what a man said is giving premium than what you said. I think for a lot of women that work in different spaces, at least once in a lifetime, you'd have experienced that.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's as frequent as every time you're having a meeting. It's likely going to happen. And now you have to learn to constantly, consistently assert yourself and say, like I said, going back to the point that I made, just like I mentioned 10 minutes ago, and I did say this first, and then sometimes it looks as if you're being forceful. But you're like, I'm not being forceful, it's just because I've said this over and over again. Then all of so one guy says, and you're like, oh, James just said, like, but I've been saying this for the past 10 minutes. All of a sudden, these are the subtle things that happen. And most times, we try to talk about it's there's a systemic, it's systemic. It's not something that will change spontaneously. We'll not just wake up and things have changed. Same also how the political space is not as friendly to women as it is to men. I'm not saying every man that goes into politics has it easy. We know politics is tough. It's a tough game. But we are just saying that when it comes to women, it's tougher for women to even aspire before you even begin to contest. Just the aspiration alone becomes a threat to you. And so I want to talk about voter turnout because we're heading towards an election. I know the Gambia, you seem to have, I mean, your elections in 2021, you had about, I think, 89% voter, 89.34% turnout for the presidential election. We are still in the 20 something percent turnout in Nigeria. So you guys are doing really well. But I also saw there was a disparity for the parliamentary elections. You had barely 51% or so voter turnout. And I'm just wondering, and I'll draw examples from both. Do we as citizens prioritize presidential elections over legislative elections? So elections into our national assemblies, into the parliament in the Gambia. do we prioritize the presidential elections over that? Because most times it seems like you have higher turnout for the presidential. When it comes to the legislative elections, you don't have as much. And to add to that question, how do we make a lot more, how do we create awareness around the importance of the legislative arm of government in such a way that we begin to even inspire a lot more women to contest for elections into those offices?
In the case of the Gambia, I think it has to do with a lack of or very limited understanding of the significance or the importance of parliamentary elections, but also the very important role, the mandate of the parliament itself. I think that very few people have a good understanding of the role of parliament and how it is an oversight institution and how it contributes to checks and balances and separation of powers in a strong democracy, right? And so we've seen people who would go all the way out to vote during the presidential elections because for them that is the most significant or that is the most important election in any country. So I think there's a lot that has to be done to raise public awareness, to raise grassroots awareness on the importance of voting for National Assembly members, of for voting during parliamentary elections, but also for voting for very competent, very ethical, very principled leaders to get into the National Assembly. Because if not, not participating in parliamentary elections, but also voting for just anyone during parliamentary elections can be a threat to democracy because you vote in people who do not hold leaders accountable, who do not exercise their duties properly or effectively. Then you have a system where the executive is not checked properly. The executive is not held accountable. So there's no like legislative oversight. This legislative oversight functions are not being implemented effectively, and that's a problem. It affects the democracy. It affects the way in which citizens engage with government. It affects the ways in which governments are held accountable and how transparency and open governance are even achieved. So I feel like a lot has to be done. And I don't think another problem with this is because people are losing trust in people that they're voting into parliament, right? So in the case of the Gambia, we would go into communities and hold community engagements and they would tell us, oh, these National Assembly members, we vote for them and we don't see them for the next 5 years. They never come back to their constituencies. They go to the capital and they stay there with their families. They never come back here. They don't relate to us. So there's the need for also enhanced parliamentary constituent engagement. So you're keeping your people engaged, you're bringing them along in the conversation and in the decisions that you're making in parliament, because you're not making decisions for yourself. You're making decisions for the community that voted you into parliament. So and all these are critical to ensuring that we're increasing public trust, but also we're raising their awareness on why it's significant for them to be a part of parliamentary elections.
Just to add to what she said, I think she was talking more for the Gambian people and bringing it back home to Nigeria. I would say that why we are having low turnout in legislative offices, having elections and even more awareness for that office is because most Nigerians are not being aware of who their parliamentary leaders are. They don't even want to know. Most of them, they just have the knowledge of, once is the president, everything is settled. They don't know who to hold accountable when anything is happening within their constituency. One thing we should do is to create awareness for people to know, and also the way they advertise the presidential election in the media space, they should also advertise the offices of the legislature and let people know who their representatives are, so that they will really know and know who to vote for. Because I think we are lacking behind in that aspect in Nigeria.
Yeah, we're lacking behind. I mean, a lot of us, when they ask who's your lawmaker, the question is, a lot of citizens, they don't know. I mean, who is the president? We know. Everything is going on. You're calling the president or the governor. But like Lala mentioned, it's beyond the president and the governor. Marcelina.
Absolutely. Beyond the president and the governor. There's an arm of fixed politics that's the work study group 1, which is particular about the office of the citizens. Okay. Currently, we are on a project. There's a website that is being built, and we have the entire 774 local governments on the website with all their leaders, so that anybody can have at a click, you see who your leader is to the core, to the very very core of your village, who your leader is, so that you can know them and hold them accountable. And I think that if this is spread across with, like I've been saying, to different organizations, if this awareness is being put out there, people will get to know who their leaders are, and they'll be able to do the right thing by holding them accountable and then even voting for the right people.
Yeah, when you talked about the office of the citizen, came to my mind. I was in a conversation somewhere, and we were talking, and they said, "Oh, the president did not do this and do that." And I said, "Oh, your lawmaker actually ought to checkmate, provide oversight." And the idea of the National Assembly, the legislative arm of government, is that's the hub of democracy. That's why you have representatives representing constituencies. So it's like a smaller fraction of the political space. So you're representing the people in this constituency. The role, honestly, is you make laws, you provide oversight, and you speak for your people. And times where the executive fails, most times we scream at the executive. I think we need to start pushing our attention to the National Assembly to say, "Oh, what are you doing there?" Your role is basically to ensure that there's some level of oversight and the executive powers are checked. Why are you not speaking up? Why are you not standing up for your people? Why are you not doing the right things? I believe that if we start amplifying some of those important roles this arm of government plays, the elections will be important, will take it seriously. Like I was giving an example of the Gambia. In Nigeria, most times, some people, we have the election of the president at the National Assembly on the same day. We have voters who will go to the polls, they take the ballot paper, they vote for the president, they leave. They don't go, they don't put the other boxes. They tell you that they don't want. I just want the one for the president. I just want to vote for the president and I leave. So it just already shows that the awareness Quincy talked about, and also what you and when you mentioned that most times lawmakers are elected, ours is a 4-year term. They go to the National Assembly. Sometimes their constituents don't see them in 4 years. They don't know who their lawmakers are. The next elections, they come back for another campaign. There is that. But the other thing is we've had so much, a lot of talk around accountability has been focused on the executive arm. And I guess if we start beaming the searchlight on the legislative arm of government, it starts creating awareness on why these people are important and why we should begin to ask them the right questions. And just bringing our conversation to an end, I want us to look at the misunderstandings or the misconceptions that exist when it comes to women political participation, especially for young women. What are those misunderstandings or misconceptions that constantly limit about how young women get into politics, or even how young women get interested in politics? What are they, and then how can we address them? If you can highlight like key strategies that we can use to address these issues so that we can increase the number of young women in politics.
While you were speaking, I thought about the case of Natasha, and I was saying thanks to some of these issues, because with these issues becomes more awareness. So when people see the issues in the political space, they become interested. For example, in Natasha's case, I see how her constituency came really out for her. And then when such things happen, those that are not even aware of the issues, they become more involved. They're like, okay, and they become more interested in the issues. So I'm saying thanks to the issues, because the more these issues, the more people are awakened to the problem and they want to be involved in it. So I think that, for example, like what happened with Natasha, that can be very discouraging for women to want to come out. But then her fight, her drive, is also inspirational at the same time.
True.
And people want to say, oh, if this is what is happening, I think we more women seeing this issue awaken more women, and they want to be out there to say, oh, I'm going to be a politician. I recently had a training day for yesterday somewhere, and then I saw this lady, and she boldly introduced herself as a politician. I'm a politician. And then I was like, wow, what got you interested in politics? And she was like, we have to be there. We have to be represented. So I see that a lot of people are coming in. And if people like the older one coming again to say that mentorship is very important, if the older women can also hold the arms of these young people who are becoming more interested in politics, I think it will be a very good one.
Yeah. Lala.
So the question on what is a misconception that they have against young women. I think the primary one for me is that we're too young to lead. That we can't lead at a certain age. That there isn't much that we can do at a certain age, right? But if I can vote for you at 18, and if I can participate in the civic space and add my voice and be a part of these processes, then why can't I be voted for, right? And I think that for a lot of young women, it is very discouraging to see how other women are treated in the political space, other women that are vocal in the political space, the treatment they get, the cyberbullying, the name calling, the slut shaming, all of these things that happen to women in politics. It discourages a lot of young women because in the Gambia, and I guess this is the same. Again, our countries share a very similar context, and I guess this is the same for other countries, including Nigeria, where like in patriarchal societies, you know how women are taught, oh, you don't. The only thing you have as a woman is your dignity. It's your name, it's your image. You have to preserve that at all costs. So for a lot of young women, when they see these women being labeled, when they see them being shamed, being discriminated, the social stigma that is being attached to them for just wanting to seek or occupy a seat of political power, it discourages them because we don't want to be the one to go through that as well. And that is why I've always advocated for legislation in the Gambia that, would prohibit this or would hold people accountable for bullying women or bullying people online, especially people that are into politics, right? And when it comes to strategies, what can we do moving forward? What can we do ahead of the next elections? I think the very first one for me is to provide support to women in the grassroots, to young women in the grassroots, right? And this can come through different ways. This can come through mentorship and capacity building or capacity strengthening. This can also come through very intentional and very tailored community dialogues that seek to address some of these misconceptions that people have, that seek to engage community leaders, traditional leaders, religious leaders, because at the end of the day, these are the people that will vote for young women. These are the people that are constituents in the wards that they contest in the villages that they contesting in. So we have to get back to those people. We have to take the conversation back to the grassroots, and we also need to make sure that political parties are taking a leading role in ensuring that they're educating their supporters, they're educating their members, right? It's not enough. I was holding a training with political party leaders the other day, and I was telling them it's not enough to just mainstream gender. You go the extra mile when you have these policies in place. You go the extra mile to educate your supporters because certain people, I don't know if this is the same thing in Nigeria, but certain people in the Gambia, whoever their political party brings as the candidate, that's the person they're voting for. It doesn't matter if the person is male or female, if the person is young or old, whoever their party presents as the candidate, they'll vote for that person. So political parties recognizing that fact also need to make sure they're educating their members, but they also putting in place intentional mechanisms. So for example, the ECOWAS has a regional strategy for women mainstream in political parties, which calls for 30% representation when parties put out candidates for elections, 30% female representation. So, applying intentional mechanisms like that until people gradually get used to the idea of women leading, women taking up space, women being effective leaders, and then we would start to see change happen.
Well, yeah, we see why I have some thoughts on because a lot to chew, but we see why I'm quite.
Okay, some of the misconceptions people have about women being leaders and women coming out to lead is that one, politics is a dirty game, it's for men, and also is for the wealthy elites. And most times it stems off from cultural norms, gender stereotypes, and also from corruption. And how we can eliminate that is by one, portraying role models like Konjo Iweala, Aisha Yusufu, making the young girls know that these people, they've come, they've stayed, they've done the job, and they were good at it, and they've done everything, and nothing happened to them. They are still leading. They are still making changes. Also, I think the media also have a lot to do. They need to start training women, bringing out, showcasing women who are doing it, and putting them in a positive light. So I think those are like the two main things we should look into.
The media is key because the other day I was talking about how our entertainment informs a lot of culture. And perhaps this is also for the movie and entertainment industry. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in how we look at the younger ones coming up now, the boys coming up now. What kind of songs, what kind of movies are they watching? What kind of shows are they following online? Those are the things that will define the tomorrow man and the tomorrow woman. Basically, the women and the men of the future are being raised today. What kind of information do they have access to? That's on the one hand, and I think Lala was also making reference to that. The misconceptions that exist. There are several ways to counter that, and it just needs us to constantly do the work. We need to go out there, project, and tell the stories of those doing those amazing work, and get the women that want to come out. We have to look for ways to support them and amplify their voices. For me, it's also in the work that we do, we need to consciously build solidarity around the few voices that are speaking up. When we see someone speaking up, let's build support around that person. That is the only way that inspires a lot more people to speak up. When one young lady wants to run for office, our first message to her is, that's great, this is fantastic, you should run for office. Not, why do you want to run for office? Are you sure you're going to win? You know, most times, if our first response is in a negative, it can even discourage and kill the little ginger she already had. And I think for me, this would be like ways that we can engage, the ways that we can get younger women, especially, to have their voices and voices heard. And I mean, this is where we're drawing the curtains in this conversation. But honestly, it's been amazing having you, Lala, join us all the way from the Gambia. I'm so glad you were able to join us on this episode of the Unamplified podcast.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I really enjoyed our conversations, and yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Thank you. And then Marcelina, it's really good to have you on this episode.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm now part of the Fix Politics family, and so I would say we'll keep trying to fix politics.
Absolutely.
On the politics works for us
Yeah.
in our continent. Quincy, over to you.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to click the subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on all social media platforms at the Unamplified Podcast, on Twitter, X, on Instagram, TikTok, Thread, and on Facebook. Also, I would like to give shout out to our amazing crew behind the cameras. Shout out to DJ Drexx, our sound engineer. Shout out to Fredcoker, Cinematographer, Ayor, co-host, Andrea, co-host, and our amazing director, Hamilton Odems. Shout out to every one of us.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is a family, and we work together to bring this amazing content to you. So the question is, if this is the first time you're coming across our podcast, please don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment. Tell us, would you vote for a woman in the next elections in your respective country, and why? This episode is brought to the support of the GIZ African Union Aware project, dedicated to supporting women political representation in Africa. And this brings us to the end of this episode. When you're on,
You can be fine.
cheers to Africa.
Cheers.
Bye. Thank you.